The garage smelled like motor oil and disappointment. I sat hunched over my workbench, trying to ignore the fire spreading through my joints like molten glass. The autoimmune flare-up had been building for 3 days, turning simple tasks into monumental challenges. My hands shook as I attempted to sort through bolts and screws, a pathetic sight for a man who once built houses with these same hands. "Eliot, where the hell are you?" Kelsey's voice cut through the humid Maine air like a rusty blade. The screen door slammed against the frame with enough force to rattle the windows. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I didn't answer immediately. Experience had taught me that silence often diffused her explosive moods, though lately nothing seemed to work. The sound of her heels clicking across the concrete floor announced her approach like a countdown to disaster. "There you are, hiding in your little cave again." She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from her shift at the clinic. "Mrs. Henderson called, said you never showed up to fix her fence today." The fence job. I'd completely forgotten about it when the flare hit this morning. Standing up felt like my bones were grinding against each other, but I managed it, turning to face my wife of 8 years. "I had a bad morning, Kels. The inflammation—" "Oh, spare me the sob story." She stepped closer, and I caught the scent of her perfume mixed with hospital disinfectant. "You know what real men do when they're tired? They work through it. They don't lie down and whine about every little ache and pain. Every little ache and pain. If she only knew what it felt like to have your own immune system declare war on your body, maybe she'd show an ounce of compassion. But compassion had never been Kelsey's strong suit, especially not lately. "It's not just being tired," I said, keeping my voice level. The doctor said. She mimicked my voice in a whiny tone that made my teeth clench. "You know what I think? I think you're using this whole sick thing as an excuse to be lazy. Poor little Eliot can't handle real work anymore." The words hit harder than any physical blow. I'd been fighting this condition for 2 years, watching it slowly strip away everything I'd built. My construction business had folded when I couldn't keep up with the physical demands. The disability payments barely covered our mortgage. And through it all, Kelsey had grown more distant, more cruel. "That's not fair," I said quietly. "Fair?" She laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "You want to talk about fair? It's not fair that I have to work double shifts while you sit around feeling sorry for yourself. It's not fair that I married a man who turned into a complete weakling." The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. Weakling. She'd been using variations of it for months now, each time with a little more venom. But something about the way she said it today, with such casual cruelty, made something snap inside me. "You know what's not fair, Kelsey?" I stepped closer, and for the first time in months, she actually took a step back. "What's not fair is having a wife who kicks you when you're down. What's not fair is working my ass off for 15 years to build something, only to have it taken away by something I can't control, and then getting treated like garbage in my own home." Her eyes widened slightly. I rarely fought back anymore, had learned that resistance only made her attacks more vicious. But today felt different. Today, I was tired of being her punching bag. "Don't you dare raise your voice to me," she hissed. "I work my tail off to keep this house running while you play with your little tools in here. The least you could do is show some gratitude instead of wallowing in self-pity." "Gratitude?" The laugh that escaped me was bitter. "For what? For the privilege of being married to someone who treats me like I'm worthless? For the joy of listening to you tell everyone in town what a disappointment I am?" Because that's exactly what she'd been doing. I'd heard it through the grapevine, Kelsey holding court at Murphy's bar, painting me as a lazy hypochondriac who'd given up on life. The whispers followed me everywhere in our small town, the pitying looks and awkward conversations. "Maybe if you gave me something to brag about, instead of embarrassing me everywhere we go. She turned to leave, then paused. Tina's having people over for a barbecue Saturday. Try not to humiliate me in front of my friends again. The screen door slammed behind her, leaving me alone with the smell of motor oil and the echo of her words. I sank back onto my stool, hands shaking worse now from anger than pain. Tina Morrison, Kelsey's best friend and enabler. Another barbecue where I'd be the object of their whispered jokes and pointed comments. Another afternoon of watching my wife flirt with other men while treating me like an unwelcome guest at my own social events. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Liam Murphy's number. Liam owned the bar where Kelsey held her little gossip sessions, and more importantly, he was one of the few people who still treated me like a human being. Eli? What's up, buddy? Hey, Liam, quick question. You know anything about Kelsey coming by the bar lately? Talking about me? There was a pause, the kind that told me everything I needed to know. Ah, man. You heard about that? Some of it. What exactly has she been saying? Another pause. Liam was a good guy, former Marine who'd taken over his family's bar after his dad died. He didn't like gossip, but he also didn't lie to his friends. Look, Eli, maybe you should talk to her about this. It's not my place to… Liam, please. I need to know what I'm dealing with. He sighed heavily. She's been painting a pretty ugly picture, man. Says you've given up, that you fake being sicker than you are to avoid responsibility. Last week she was going on about how she married a man and ended up with a child. The words hit like physical blows, each one confirming what I'd suspected but hoped wasn't true. My own wife was systematically destroying my reputation in the community where I'd lived my entire life. There's more, Liam continued reluctantly. She's been pretty friendly with Brent Collier lately. Real friendly, if you know what I mean. Brent Collier, owner of Collier's Auto Repair, local gym rat, and the kind of guy who thought flexing his muscles made up for having nothing between his ears. I'd done some work for him years ago and found him to be arrogant and crude, the type who measured his worth by how many women he could charm and how much he could bench press. Define friendly, I said, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Sitting real close, laughing at all his jokes, touching his arm. Could be nothing, but it doesn't look good, Eli. I'm sorry. After I hung up, I sat in the garage for a long time, listening to the sounds of suburban life filtering through the walls. Lawnmowers, children playing, the distant hum of traffic. Normal sounds from a normal world that suddenly felt very far away. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Henderson, asking politely if I could reschedule the fence repair. She was a widow in her 70s, who'd always been kind to me, even after my business collapsed. The thought of disappointing her made my stomach turn. I texted back an apology and promised to be there first thing Monday morning, flare-up or no flare-up. Some things were more important than pain. The house felt different when I finally went inside. Kelsey was in the kitchen, aggressively chopping vegetables for dinner, her movements sharp and angry. She didn't look up when I entered. I'm going to fix Mrs. Henderson's fence Monday, I said. Good for you. The knife blade hit the cutting board with unnecessary force. And I think we need to talk, really talk, about what's happening between us. Now she looked up, her expression cold. What's happening is that I'm trying to hold our lives together while you fall apart. If you want to help with that instead of analyzing it to death, great. Otherwise, stay out of my way. She swept the chopped vegetables into a pan with violent efficiency, and I realized that whatever we'd once had was truly gone. The woman I'd married, who used to laugh at my jokes and hold my hand during movies, had been replaced by this stranger who seemed to hate everything about me. But as I watched her cook, something else occurred to me. If she was really done with our marriage, if she was already moving on with someone like Brent Collier, then maybe it was time I stopped trying to save something that was already dead. Maybe it was time to start thinking about what came next. Saturday arrived with the kind of oppressive humidity that made everything stick to your skin. The barbecue at Tina's house was supposed to start at 2, but Kelsey had been getting ready since noon, trying on different outfits and fussing with her hair like she was preparing for a red carpet event instead of burgers and beer in someone's backyard. "How do I look?" she asked, emerging from the bedroom in a sundress that was definitely not something she'd wear for me anymore. "Nice," I said, though the word felt hollow. She did look nice. Beautiful, actually. It was one of the cruel ironies of our situation that my wife had never been more attractive or more distant. "Try to make an effort today, okay?" She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror one more time. "These are important people. Tina's husband just made partner at his law firm, and the Hendersons will be there." "Not Mrs. Henderson," I interrupted. "Different Hendersons, the ones who own the car dealership." "Right, even better. The point is, these people matter in this town. Try not to embarrass me." The drive to Tina's house took 10 minutes through tree-lined streets that had once felt like home. Now they felt like a gauntlet of judgment, every neighbor a potential witness to my failures. Kelsey spent the entire trip checking her phone, texting someone and smiling at the responses. "Work?" I asked, nodding toward her phone. "Just coordinating with Tina about what to bring." She didn't look up from the screen. Tina Morrison lived in one of the newer developments on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the houses all looked vaguely similar and the lawns were maintained by professional services. Her backyard was already full of people when we arrived, the sound of laughter and conversation drifting over the fence. "Kelsey, there you are!" Tina rushed over as soon as we entered the yard, embracing my wife like they hadn't seen each other in months instead of days. Tina was a petite blonde with sharp features and an even sharper tongue, the kind of woman who collected gossip like some people collected stamps. "Hi, Eli," she added as an afterthought, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "How are you feeling? Kelsey mentioned you've been having a rough time lately." The way she said it made it clear that rough time was a euphemism for something much less charitable. I forced a smile and accepted the beer she offered, noting that it was a cheap brand while everyone else seemed to be drinking craft beer from bottles. "I'm managing," I said. "Thanks for having us." "Of course. You know, my cousin went through something similar. Chronic fatigue, always tired, couldn't hold down a job. Turned out it was all in his head. Once he got some therapy and started taking responsibility for his life, everything turned around." The implication was clear, delivered with the kind of fake concern that made it impossible to respond without looking defensive. I took a long drink of my beer and excused myself to find somewhere less hostile. The party was exactly what I'd expected, a collection of local professionals and their spouses, the kind of people who measured success by the size of their houses and the newness of their cars. I recognized most of them, had done work for several over the years when my business was thriving. Now they looked through me like I was invisible. I found a spot near the back fence where I could observe without having to make small talk. From there, I had a clear view of the entire party, including my wife holding court near the pool with Tina and several other women. She was animated, gesturing with her hands as she told some story that had the group laughing. "Eli Parker, right?" A voice beside me made me turn. A tall man with graying hair extended his hand. "Jim Morrison, Tina's husband. I don't think we've met officially." I shook his hand, surprised by the genuine warmth in his grip. "Nice to meet you. Thanks for having us. Tina mentioned you used to run Parker Construction. Built the Johnson house out on Maple Street?" "That's right." I was surprised he knew about it. The Johnson house had been one of my better projects, a custom build that had won a local architecture award. Beautiful work. I drove by it the other day and was admiring the stonework on the foundation. You don't see craftsmanship like that anymore. For the first time in months, someone was talking to me about my work with respect instead of pity. We spent several minutes discussing construction techniques and local building codes, and I felt almost normal again. Sorry to hear about your health issues, Jim said eventually. Autoimmune stuff is no joke. My brother has rheumatoid arthritis and it nearly destroyed him before they found the right treatment. People who haven't dealt with it don't understand how debilitating it can be. Yeah, it's been a challenge. I appreciated that he didn't offer unsolicited advice or suggest it was all in my head. If you ever get back into contracting, even part-time, give me a call. I'm always looking for quality people for smaller projects. He handed me his business card and moved on to talk to other guests, leaving me with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe I wasn't as finished as everyone thought. That feeling lasted about 10 minutes, until I heard familiar laughter from across the yard. Kelsey was talking to someone I couldn't see, her voice carrying that flirtatious tone I remembered from when we were dating. I moved closer, using the crowd as cover. "Oh, Brent, you're terrible," she was saying, playfully swatting at someone's arm. "You can't say things like that." I positioned myself behind a group of people and finally got a clear view. Brent Collier stood close to my wife, close enough that they were almost touching. He was everything I wasn't: tall, muscular, confident, and apparently healthy. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his polo shirt looked like it cost more than I spent on clothes in a month. "What can I say? I'm a bad influence," he replied, his voice carrying that cocky tone that had always annoyed me. "Maybe you need more bad influences in your life." "Maybe I do." Kelsey's response was barely above a whisper, but I heard it clearly. The way she looked at him, the way she leaned into his space. It was unmistakable. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Seeing it confirmed what Liam had told me, but witnessing it firsthand was something else entirely. My wife was flirting with another man at a public gathering, in front of people we both knew, with no apparent concern for discretion or my feelings. "Eli, there you are!" Tina appeared beside me with her fake smile and predatory eyes. "Having fun? You look a little pale." "I'm fine," I managed. Good, good. You know, I was just talking to the girls about how hard this must be for you. Being sick, out of work, watching Kelsey have to carry all the responsibility. It must be so emasculating." The word hit like a slap. Emasculating. She said it loud enough for several people nearby to hear, and I saw heads turn in our direction. "I mean, Kelsey is such a strong woman," Tina continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "She's really stepped up, working all those extra shifts, taking care of everything. Some wives might not be able to handle that kind of pressure, but she's amazing." Each word was carefully chosen to highlight my inadequacies while praising Kelsey's martyrdom. I realized this wasn't casual cruelty, it was coordinated. Kelsey had been feeding Tina ammunition, and now Tina was using it to publicly humiliate me. "She is amazing," I agreed, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "I'm lucky to have someone so dedicated." Tina's smile faltered slightly at my calm response. She'd been expecting defensiveness or anger, something she could use to further the narrative of me being unstable or difficult. "Well, I should go check on the food," she said, clearly disappointed that her attack hadn't landed the way she'd hoped. I stayed at the party for another hour, watching my wife flirt with Brent Collier, while their friends whispered about what a burden I'd become. Several people made pointed comments about pulling your weight and personal responsibility, always delivered with that same fake concern that made it impossible to respond without looking defensive. The final straw came when I overheard Kelsey talking to another group of women near the house. I'd gone inside to use the bathroom and caught part of their conversation through the open kitchen window. "I just don't know how much more I can take," Kelsey was saying, her voice heavy with practiced weariness. "He's become so dependent, so needy. Sometimes I feel more like a caregiver than a wife." "That must be so hard for you," one of the women responded. "Have you thought about other options?" "What do you mean?" "Well, if he's not getting better, if this is just how things are going to be, maybe it's time to think about what's best for you. You're still young, still beautiful. You shouldn't have to sacrifice your whole life." There was a pause, and when Kelsey spoke again, her voice was softer, more thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, actually, about what I really want from life." I didn't need to hear any more. I walked back outside, found Kelsey, and told her I was ready to leave. She protested, saying the party was just getting started, but something in my expression must have warned her not to push. The drive home was silent, except for the radio playing softly in the background. Kelsey stared out the passenger window, occasionally checking her phone and smiling at whatever messages she was receiving. "Did you have a good time?" I asked as we pulled into our driveway. "It was nice to socialize with people who aren't completely negative about everything," she replied without looking at me. "Like Brent Collier?" Now she turned, her eyes flashing with something between guilt and defiance. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you spent most of the party flirting with him while your friends took turns telling everyone what a useless husband I am." "That's ridiculous. Brent and I were just talking, and nobody said anything about you that wasn't true." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. "Wasn't true?" "Oh, come on, Eli. You think people are blind? You think they can't see what's happened to you? You used to be somebody in this town. Now you're just this." She gestured vaguely at me, and I realized that in her eyes, I really had become nothing more than an embarrassment to be managed. "You're right," I said quietly. "I used to be somebody. I used to be married to someone who loved me." "Love doesn't pay the bills," she shot back. "Love doesn't fix the fact that you've given up on everything that made you worth loving in the first place." She got out of the car and walked into the house, leaving me sitting in the driveway with the engine running and the radio playing a song I didn't recognize. For a long moment I considered just driving away, getting on the highway and not stopping until I reached somewhere nobody knew my name or my failures. Instead, I turned off the engine and went inside. But something had changed during that car ride. Some final thread of hope or denial had snapped. I was done trying to save a marriage that was already over. I was done being the victim in someone else's story about my life. It was time to start writing my own ending. The revelation came on a Tuesday morning in the most mundane way possible. Kelsey had left for work early, muttering something about covering an extra shift, and I was in the kitchen trying to force down breakfast despite another flare-up that made everything taste like cardboard. That's when her phone rang. She'd forgotten it on the counter, something that never happened. Kelsey guarded that phone like it contained state secrets, always keeping it close, always angling the screen away when she texted. The ringtone, some pop song I didn't recognize, echoed through the empty kitchen. I almost ignored it. Almost. But then I saw the name on the screen. B. Auto Shop. Brent. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Same name, same insistent tone. I stared at it, my coffee growing cold in my hands, and felt something crystallize in my chest. This was the moment. The fork in the road where I either remained willfully blind or finally faced the truth I'd been avoiding. The phone rang a third time. I answered it. "Morning, beautiful." Brent's voice was thick with intimacy and sleep. "Miss me already?" I said nothing, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Kels, you there, baby?" "She left her phone," I said finally, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear Brent's brain scrambling to process what had just happened, to figure out how much I knew and how much damage control was needed. Hey, Eli, we were discussing. She mentioned her car was making a noise and Save it, I interrupted. We both know what this is. Look, man, I think you got the wrong idea. Kelsey and we're just friends. She's been going through a tough time with your situation. and sometimes people need someone to talk to. The casual way he referred to my illness as a situation made my jaw clench. How long? How long what? How long have you been screwing my wife? Another pause, shorter this time. When he spoke again, the fake concern was gone, replaced by something uglier. That's between me and her, don't you think? Maybe if you'd been taking care of business at home, she wouldn't need to find what she's missing somewhere else. The line went dead. I set the phone back on the counter and stared at it for a long time, waiting for the rage to hit, for the pain of betrayal to overwhelm me. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Finally, I had confirmation of what I'd suspected for months. No more wondering, no more second-guessing myself, no more trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid or insecure. My wife was having an affair, and now I knew it for certain. The phone buzzed with a text message from Brent. "Don't do anything stupid. This doesn't have to get ugly." I almost laughed. He was worried about me making things ugly? After months of watching my marriage disintegrate while he played the sympathetic friend, after listening to my wife's increasingly vicious attacks on my character, after being systematically isolated and humiliated, now he was concerned about ugliness? I took a screenshot of his text message, then scrolled through Kelsey's recent calls and messages. She hadn't been particularly careful about hiding things, probably because she assumed I was too sick and defeated to investigate. The evidence was overwhelming. Dozens of calls and texts between them, often late at night or early in the morning when I was asleep. Most of the messages were coded, but the intent was clear. References to missing each other, to being careful, to when this is all over. The timeline painted a clear picture. The affair had been going on for at least 3 months, probably longer. One text thread from the previous week caught my attention. Kelsey. He's getting suspicious. Asked me about you yesterday. Brent. Maybe it's time to pull the trigger. You said yourself he's not getting better. Kelsey. I know, it's just complicated. The house, the finances, everything. Brent. We'll figure it out. You deserve better than being tied to a sick man who can't provide for you. Kelsey. You're right. I've wasted enough of my life playing nursemaid. I read that exchange 3 times, each pass driving the knife deeper. Playing nursemaid. That's how she saw our 8-year marriage, as an inconvenient caregiving obligation. The front door opened, and I heard Kelsey's voice calling out, "Eli, I forgot my phone. Have you seen it?" I quickly forwarded several of the most damning text threads to my own phone, then deleted the evidence of having done so. By the time she reached the kitchen, I was back at the table with my coffee, her phone sitting innocently on the counter where she'd left it. There it is! She grabbed it and immediately checked for missed calls and messages. I watched her face change as she saw Brent's multiple attempts to reach her. Did anyone call? Your boyfriend, I said calmly. She froze, phone halfway to her ear. What? Brent called, 3 times. I answered the last one. The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly, switching to attack mode like she always did when cornered. You answered my phone? How dare you invade my privacy like that? Privacy? I laughed, and the sound surprised both of us. You're screwing another man and you're worried about privacy? I don't know what you think you heard, but I heard enough. I stood up, surprised by how steady I felt. I know about the affair, Kels. I know how long it's been going on. I know what you really think of me, and I know you're planning to leave. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how much I actually knew versus how much I was guessing. Finally, she seemed to make a decision. Fine, she said, her voice cold. Yes, I'm seeing Brent. Yes, I'm planning to leave you. Are you happy now? You've forced me to hurt you when I was trying to be kind about it. Kind? The word came out sharper than I intended. You call 3 months of lying and cheating kind? I call it surviving, she shot back. Do you have any idea what it's like being married to someone who's given up on life? Someone who can't work, can't provide, can't even get out of bed half the time? I'm 32 years old, Eli. I'm not ready to spend the rest of my life as a caregiver to someone who won't even try to get better. I am trying to get better. I go to every doctor's appointment, I take every medication, I do every therapy they recommend. This isn't something I can just will away. Isn't it? Her voice dripped with disdain. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you found the perfect excuse to avoid all responsibility. Poor Eli, too sick to work, too sick to help around the house, too sick to be a real husband. The cruelty of it took my breath away. This was the woman I'd loved for over a decade, who I'd supported through nursing school, who I'd planned a future with. Now she was looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. So what's the plan? I asked. You and Brent ride off into the sunset while I what? Disappear quietly? The plan is for us to get divorced like adults. You'll get your disability payments and whatever equity is left in the house after we sell it. I'll move on with my life, and you can figure out yours. How generous of you. Don't be sarcastic, Eli. This is hard enough without you making it worse. Hard for who? You seem to have everything worked out pretty nicely. New boyfriend, new life, and all you have to do is dump the sick husband who's become inconvenient. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'm staying at Tina's for a few days while you process this. When I come back, we can discuss the details like civilized people. What about Brent? Doesn't he get a say in your plans? She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. Brent understands what I need. He knows how to treat a woman, how to make her feel wanted and appreciated. When's the last time you made me feel like anything other than a burden? The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my marriage and a strange sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. The pretense was finally over. No more walking on eggshells, no more trying to win back someone who'd already left emotionally long ago. I spent the rest of the morning going through the house, looking at 8 years of shared life with new eyes. The wedding photos on the mantel, the furniture we'd picked out together, the little touches that had once made this place feel like home. It all felt like evidence from someone else's life. My phone buzzed with a text from Liam. Heard through the grapevine that Kelsey moved out. You okay? The speed with which news traveled in our small town never ceased to amaze me. I texted back, long story. Can we talk later? Come by the bar tonight after we close. I'll keep the beer cold. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Whatever happened next, at least I wouldn't be facing it completely alone. The house felt different that evening, quieter but also somehow lighter. I made myself a simple dinner and ate it at the kitchen table without anyone criticizing my appetite or commenting on my energy levels. I watched a baseball game without anyone sighing dramatically about my choice of entertainment. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Around 9 o'clock, I drove to Murphy's bar. The evening crowd was winding down, just a few regulars nursing beers and watching sports highlights. Liam waved me over to a corner booth where we could talk privately. So, he said, sliding a beer across the table. Want to tell me what really happened? I gave him the abbreviated version. The phone call, the confrontation, Kelsey's admission about the affair. Liam listened without interruption, his expression growing darker as the story progressed. That's cold, man, even for her. The thing is, I'm not even surprised. Hurt, angry, but not surprised. It's like I knew this was coming and just couldn't admit it to myself. What are you going to do? It was a good question, one I'd been thinking about all day. The old me, the sick and defeated version, would have probably just accepted whatever terms Kelsey dictated, grateful for whatever scraps of dignity she allowed me to keep. But something had changed when I answered that phone this morning. Maybe it was finally having concrete proof of what I'd suspected, or maybe it was the relief of not having to pretend anymore. Whatever it was, I felt more like myself than I had in months. I'm going to fight, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Fight how? I took a long drink of my beer and smiled. I haven't figured that out yet. But I'm done being the victim in this story. If Kelsey wants to play games, if she wants to humiliate me and throw away our marriage for a guy like Brent Collier, then maybe it's time she learned that actions have consequences. Liam raised his beer in a mock toast. To consequences. To consequences, I agreed. I had no idea what I was going to do, but for the first time in months, I was actually looking forward to finding out. 3 days passed before Kelsey returned to collect more of her belongings. 3 days during which I had the house to myself and time to think without her constant criticism echoing in my ears. 3 days to plan. She arrived on Friday afternoon with Tina in tow, clearly expecting moral support for whatever confrontation she thought was coming. I was in the garage when I heard their voices, sharp and animated as they discussed strategy like generals planning a campaign. "Just get your stuff and get out," Tina was saying. "Don't let him guilt trip you or make you feel bad about moving on with your life." I know, it's just weird, 8 years. 8 years of what? Taking care of a man who won't take care of himself? You're doing the right thing, Kels. Brent's a real man, someone who can actually provide for you. I stepped into the doorway, making my presence known. Both women turned, Tina's expression immediately shifting to barely concealed hostility, while Kelsey just looked uncomfortable. "Ladies," I said pleasantly, "don't mind me. I'll just be out here if you need anything." Kelsey studied my face, clearly trying to read my mood. She'd been expecting anger, tears, desperate pleas for reconciliation. My calm demeanor seemed to unnerve her more than any emotional outburst would have. "We won't be long," she said finally. "Just getting some clothes and personal items. Take your time." I went back to my workbench and continued organizing tools, listening to them move through the house. Their voices carried through the thin walls, and I caught fragments of conversation that painted a clear picture of their plans. Kelsey would stay with Tina until the divorce was finalized, then move in with Brent. They'd already discussed selling the house and splitting whatever equity remained after paying off the mortgage. She'd keep her car, I'd keep mine, and we'd divide the bank accounts and retirement funds according to state law. It was all very civilized and practical, the kind of no-fault dissolution that happened thousands of times every day across the country. Clean, simple, and completely one-sided in her favor. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the last 3 days doing my own research. I'd consulted with a divorce attorney, not the expensive one Kelsey thought I couldn't afford, but a sharp young lawyer fresh out of law school who was hungry for clients and willing to work within my budget. I'd also been busy with my phone, taking screenshots and backing up evidence, documenting not just the affair, but also Kelsey's systematic campaign to destroy my reputation in town. The attorney had been very interested in those text messages, particularly the ones where Kelsey admitted to exaggerating my symptoms to her friends and co-workers. "Alienation of affection isn't recognized in Maine," she'd explained, "but adultery can still affect property division and spousal support, especially when there's evidence of deliberate cruelty or an attempt to isolate the wronged spouse. More importantly, I'd spent time reconnecting with people I'd lost touch with during the worst of my illness. Former clients, old friends, even some of Kelsey's co-workers who'd grown tired of her constant complaining and gossip. The picture that emerged was very different from the one she'd been painting. "Eli, can we talk for a minute?" Kelsey appeared in the garage doorway looking nervous. "Sure." I set down my tools and gave her my full attention. "I want you to know that I never meant for things to happen this way. The affair, it just developed. Brent was there when I needed someone to talk to, and you were so wrapped up in being sick that you didn't even notice I was drowning." It was a carefully crafted speech, designed to make the affair my fault while positioning her as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. A few weeks ago, it might have worked. I might have actually apologized for failing to notice her emotional needs while I was struggling with a chronic illness. "I see," I said neutrally. "The thing is, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. I'd prefer easy. We divide everything fairly, file no-fault papers, and move on with our lives. No drama, no ugliness, no lawyers getting rich off our problems. And if I prefer the hard way? Her expression hardened slightly. Then you'll lose. I've got documentation of your condition, your inability to work, your increasing dependence on me for basic household functions. Any judge will see that I've been carrying an unfair burden, and that I deserve compensation for the sacrifices I've made. It was a threat, delivered with the confidence of someone who thought they held all the cards. What she didn't know was that I'd been documenting things too, and that her evidence of my dependence was largely fictional. I'll think about it, I said. Don't think too long. Brent's being patient, but he won't wait forever. There are plenty of women in this town who'd appreciate what he has to offer. The implication was clear. I should be grateful she was offering me any terms at all. Grateful that she was willing to leave me with anything after the burden I'd supposedly been. After they left, I called my attorney and updated her on the conversation. She listened carefully, taking notes, asking pointed questions about Kelsey's threats and demands. She's overplaying her hand, the lawyer said finally. The fact that she's already moved in with her affair partner before filing papers actually works in your favor. And these text messages you've shown me, they paint a picture of someone who's been planning this for months while lying to you about her intentions. What are my options? Several. We can file first, citing adultery and mental cruelty. We can subpoena her phone records and social media accounts to establish the timeline of the affair. We can also depose some of these people she's been spreading lies to, get their statements on the record. It sounded expensive and time-consuming, exactly the kind of legal battle I would have avoided a few weeks ago. But something had changed in me since that phone call with Brent. I was tired of being pushed around, tired of being treated like a problem to be solved or an obstacle to be removed. Do it, I said. All of it. It's going to get ugly, Eli. She's not going to just roll over, and neither is her boyfriend. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the last few months, about the constant humiliation and emotional abuse, about being systematically isolated from friends and treated like a burden in my own home, about my wife flirting with another man at a public gathering while her friends took turns mocking my illness. Let it get ugly, I said. I'm done being the nice guy. That evening, I drove to Collier's Auto Repair. The shop was closed, but I could see lights on in the office and Brent's truck parked out front. I sat in my car across the street for a while, studying the building and thinking about the man inside who'd been sleeping with my wife. Brent Collier had always been the kind of guy who took what he wanted without worrying about the consequences. In high school, he'd been the star athlete who got away with things because he was useful to the team. As an adult, he'd built a successful business by being aggressive and ruthless, undercutting competitors and poaching their customers. Now he'd decided he wanted my wife, and he'd taken her with the same casual arrogance he applied to everything else in his life. The difference was that this time, his actions had consequences he hadn't anticipated. I pulled out my phone and called the shop's main number. Through the window, I could see Brent look up from his desk and answer. Collier's Auto. We need to talk, I said. Eli? Look, man, I told you this doesn't have to get ugly. Meet me at Murphy's bar in an hour. Come alone. I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not asking what you think. I'm telling you what's going to happen. 1 hour. I hung up before he could respond and drove to the bar. Liam was working the evening shift, and the place was moderately busy with the usual Friday night crowd. I found a table in the back corner where we could have some privacy. Brent arrived exactly on time, swaggering through the door like he owned the place. He was dressed in his usual uniform of expensive jeans and a tight polo shirt designed to show off his gym-built physique. Several women in the bar turned to look at him, and he flashed them his practiced smile before making his way to my table. All right, I'm here, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. What do you want? I want to understand something, I said calmly. Help me figure out the timeline here. When exactly did you decide to start screwing my wife? His jaw tightened. Watch your mouth. It's a simple question. Was it before or after you found out I was sick? Because I'm curious whether you're just an opportunist or if you actually planned this whole thing. Nobody planned anything. Kelsey was unhappy, she needed someone to talk to, and things developed naturally. It's not like you were paying attention to her needs. Because I was dealing with a chronic illness. Because you gave up. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You know what the difference is between you and me? When life hits me hard, I hit back harder. When it hits you, you curl up in a ball and wait for someone else to fix it. Is that what you told her? That I'd given up? I didn't have to tell her anything. She could see it for herself. You went from being a successful contractor to being a professional victim. What woman wants to be tied to that? The casual cruelty of his words was breathtaking, but I kept my expression neutral. So, you were just being a good friend, helping her through a difficult time. That's right. And the fact that she's married didn't matter to you. He shrugged. Marriage is just a piece of paper. If she was happy with you, I never would have had a chance. The fact that she came to me tells you everything you need to know about the state of your relationship. I nodded thoughtfully, as if his logic made perfect sense. You know what? You're absolutely right. Kelsey made her choice, and I should respect that. Brent looked surprised by my reasonable response. He'd clearly been expecting anger or threats, something that would justify whatever narrative he and Kelsey had constructed about me being unstable or dangerous. I'm glad you see it that way, he said cautiously. I do. In fact, I think you two deserve each other. You're both selfish, manipulative people who take what they want without caring who gets hurt. It's actually kind of perfect. Now his expression darkened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Let me tell you what I know, Brent. I know you've been having this affair for at least 3 months. I know you've been encouraging Kelsey to leave me, probably promising her all kinds of things about the wonderful life you'll have together. I know you think you've won some kind of prize. I have won. I got the woman, and you got to keep being you. I smiled, and something about it made him shift uncomfortably in his chair. You know what the funny thing is? I actually feel sorry for you. Sorry for me? You think you know Kelsey, but you only know the version of her she shows you when she wants something. You haven't lived with her for 8 years. You haven't seen what she's really like when the novelty wears off and real life sets in. She's nothing like you, he said defensively. You're right about that. She's worse. At least my illness is real. Her cruelty is a choice she makes every day. I stood up and dropped a 20 on the table. Enjoy your prize, Brent. Something tells me you're going to get exactly what you deserve. As I walked away, I heard him call after me. This isn't over, Parker. I turned back with that same smile. No, it's not. It's just getting started. The real war was about to begin, and for the first time in months, I was looking forward to the fight. The divorce papers arrived on a Monday morning, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic about the early hour. I signed for them with a smile that seemed to confuse him, then sat at my kitchen table reading through Kelsey's demands over coffee and toast. She wanted everything. The house, half my disability payments, alimony, and most of our shared assets. According to her filing, I was an abusive, unstable man who had become increasingly dependent and threatening as my condition worsened. She painted herself as a victim who had endured years of emotional manipulation and financial irresponsibility. It was a masterpiece of fiction, carefully crafted to make me look like a monster, and her like a long-suffering saint who deserved compensation for her sacrifices. If I didn't know better, I might have been impressed by the sheer audacity of it. My phone rang as I was reading through her accusations for the 3rd time. My attorney's name appeared on the screen. Have you seen the papers yet? She asked without preamble. Just finished reading them. She's really going for the throat. Yes, she is. But she's also made several critical errors that we can exploit. First, she filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, while simultaneously making accusations of abuse and mental instability. You can't have it both ways. Either it's a no-fault dissolution, or it's a contested divorce based on misconduct. What does that mean for us? It means we can force her to prove her allegations or withdraw them. And based on the evidence you've provided, I don't think she can prove anything. In fact, I think we can turn this whole thing around on her. I spent the next hour on the phone with my lawyer, going over strategy and timeline. She'd already filed our countersuit, citing adultery and mental cruelty, and had subpoenaed Kelsey's phone records and social media accounts. We'd also deposed several witnesses who could testify to Kelsey's campaign of lies and character assassination. The key is going to be controlling the narrative, my attorney explained. Right now, she thinks she's got you painted into a corner. She's counting on you being too sick, too defeated, or too poor to fight back effectively. We're going to show her how wrong she is. After hanging up, I drove to Murphy's bar. It was early afternoon, and the place was nearly empty except for a few regulars and Liam restocking bottles behind the bar. He looked up when I entered, his expression immediately shifting to concern. "You look different," he said. "Better, but also, I don't know. Dangerous?" "I feel dangerous," I admitted, settling onto a bar stool. "Kelsey filed for divorce yesterday. She wants everything, and she's claiming I'm an abusive, unstable deadbeat. That's bullshit, and everyone in town knows it." "Not everyone. She's been very effective at managing the narrative. But that's about to change." I filled him in on the legal strategy, the evidence we'd gathered, and the countersuit we'd filed. Liam listened with growing amazement, occasionally shaking his head or muttering curses under his breath. "Jesus, Eli, you've been busy." "I'm just getting started. I spent 8 years being a good husband to someone who was planning to destroy me the moment I became inconvenient. Now she's going to find out what happens when you push a man too far." "What do you need from me?" It was a simple question, but the loyalty behind it meant everything. Liam was offering to help without even knowing what I might ask of him. That kind of friendship was rare, and I wasn't going to waste it. "Information," I said. "You hear everything in here. I need to know what Kelsey and her friends are saying, what their plans are, who's supporting them. Knowledge is power, and right now I need all the power I can get." "Done. What else?" "Nothing illegal, nothing that could come back on you or the bar, but if opportunities arise to clarify certain misconceptions about my character or my condition, I'd appreciate your help." He grinned, and for a moment he looked like the Marine he'd once been. This is going to be fun. That evening, I got my first taste of how effective Kelsey's smear campaign had been. I stopped by the grocery store to pick up supplies, and the checkout clerk, a woman I'd known for years, could barely make eye contact. Her usual friendly chatter was replaced by awkward silence and nervous glances. "How are you feeling, Eli?" she asked finally, her voice heavy with the kind of pity usually reserved for terminal patients. "I'm doing well, thanks. How's your family?" "Oh, we're fine. I heard about you and Kelsey. I'm sorry things didn't work out." The way she said it made it clear that she'd heard Kelsey's version of events, the one where I was a broken man who'd become too much of a burden for my saintly wife to bear. I could see the judgment in her eyes, the assumption that I was somehow to blame for my marriage falling apart. "These things happen," I said pleasantly. "Sometimes people show you who they really are, and you have to decide whether you can live with that." She looked confused by my calm response, clearly expecting bitterness or self-pity. I paid for my groceries and left her with something to think about. The real test came 2 days later when I ran into Tina at the post office. She was with another woman I didn't recognize, and they were deep in conversation when they spotted me. Tina's face immediately shifted to an expression of exaggerated sympathy. "Eli, how are you holding up? This must be so difficult for you." Actually, I'm doing better than I have in months, I replied honestly. It's amazing how much energy you have when you're not constantly being told what a failure you are. Tina's companion looked confused, clearly not expecting that response. Tina herself seemed taken aback. Well, I just want you to know that we all understand how hard this is. Kelsey's been so worried about you, afraid you might do something drastic. It was a carefully planted seed, designed to make me look unstable and potentially dangerous. The kind of thing that could be used to justify a restraining order or emergency custody of assets. That's sweet of her to be concerned, I said with a smile. Though I have to wonder why she'd be worried about someone she claims was abusive and threatening. Seems like she'd be relieved to be free of such a dangerous man. Tina's eyes widened as she realized the trap she'd walked into. If I was really the monster Kelsey claimed, then her supposed concern for my well-being made no sense. If I wasn't a monster, then Kelsey's accusations were lies. That's not what I meant. Of course not. I'm sure you're just being a good friend, trying to help Kelsey through this difficult time. Though I have to say, some of the stories she's been telling about me are pretty creative. I'm almost impressed by her imagination. I left them standing there looking confused and worried, probably wondering how much I knew and what I planned to do with the information. It was a small victory, but it felt good to finally be on offense instead of defense. That night, Liam called with intelligence from the bar. Kelsey and Brent had been in earlier, holding court with their supporters and discussing strategy. They were confident that I'd cave quickly once I realized how expensive and difficult a contested divorce would be. Brent was running his mouth about how you're all talk, Liam reported. Said you don't have the balls or the money to fight them properly? Kelsey agreed, said you'd always been weak when it came to confrontation. What else? They're planning something for this weekend. Some kind of public event where they're going to make an appearance together, really rub it in your face. Tina suggested the Harvest Festival, said it would be perfect timing. The Harvest Festival was the town's biggest social event of the year, a weekend-long celebration that drew people from all over the county. If Kelsey and Brent wanted to make a public statement about their relationship, it would be the perfect venue. It would also be the perfect place for me to make a statement of my own. Thanks for the heads up, I told Liam. This is going to be very interesting. I spent the next few days preparing, making phone calls, arranging meetings, and setting pieces in motion. By Friday afternoon, everything was ready. Kelsey and Brent thought they were going to use the festival to humiliate me one final time. They had no idea what was actually coming. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the Harvest Festival. I took my time getting ready, showering and shaving carefully, putting on my best jeans and a button-down shirt that Kelsey had always said looked good on me. If this was going to be a performance, I wanted to look the part. The festival was set up in the town square and surrounding streets, with vendor booths, food trucks, and a small stage for local bands and community announcements. By noon, the place was packed with families, couples, and groups of friends enjoying the festivities. I bought a coffee and a funnel cake and found a spot where I could observe without being too obvious about it. It didn't take long to spot Kelsey and Brent. They were making a grand entrance, walking hand in hand through the crowd like some kind of royal couple. Kelsey was dressed to kill in a sundress and heels that were completely impractical for walking on grass and gravel. Brent wore his usual uniform of expensive casual wear designed to show off his physique. They were clearly enjoying the attention, the whispers and stares from people who knew about our situation. This was their victory lap, their public declaration that they'd won and I'd lost. Several people approached them with congratulations and support, treating them like some kind of romantic success story instead of a pair of adulterers. I watched from a distance as they worked the crowd, accepting sympathy for the difficult situation they'd been forced to navigate. Kelsey played her part perfectly, The brave woman who'd finally found the strength to leave her troubled marriage and find happiness with a real man. Around 2 o'clock, they made their way to the beer garden that had been set up near the main stage. This was where the adult crowd gathered, away from the families with small children. It was also where I'd arranged for several key conversations to take place. I finished my funnel cake and started moving through the crowd, making casual contact with people I hadn't seen in months. Former clients, old friends, neighbors who'd known me before my illness changed everything. The conversations were brief but pointed, designed to plant seeds and create questions. "Good to see you looking so well, Eli. You seem like your old self again." "Thanks, Jim. Funny how much better you feel when you're not constantly being told you're worthless." "I heard about the divorce. Sorry it didn't work out." "Actually, I think it's the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes you don't realize how toxic a situation is until you're out of it." Each conversation was carefully calibrated to create doubt about the narrative Kelsey had been spreading. I wasn't attacking her directly or making accusations. I was simply presenting myself as a reasonable, healthy man who was moving forward with his life. Around 3 o'clock, the main event began. Kelsey and Brent had positioned themselves at a prominent table in the beer garden, surrounded by their supporters. They were holding court, accepting congratulations and sympathy in equal measure. That's when my attorney arrived. Sarah Chen was a small woman in her early 30s, but she had the kind of presence that made people take notice. She was dressed professionally, but not formally, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Mr. Parker?" She approached my table with a warm smile. "I'm Sarah Chen. We spoke on the phone. Thank you for agreeing to meet here." Our conversation was loud enough to be overheard by nearby tables, and I saw several heads turn in our direction. In a town this size, a strange lawyer talking to the local divorce case was bound to attract attention. "I've reviewed all the evidence you provided," she said, opening a thick folder. "The text messages, the phone records, the witness statements. I have to say, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of adultery and character assassination I've seen." More heads were turning now. Kelsey's table had gone quiet, and I could see her straining to hear what we were discussing. "The timeline is particularly damning," Sarah continued, her voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "Your wife was planning this affair and the subsequent divorce for months while lying to you about her intentions. And some of these text messages, well, let's just say they show a level of premeditation that's going to be very difficult for her to explain." I saw Tina lean over and whisper something urgent in Kelsey's ear. Brent was looking in our direction with obvious concern, probably wondering how much trouble he was in. "What about her accusations against me?" I asked, playing my part in the performance. "Completely unsupported by evidence. In fact, we have multiple witnesses who can testify that you've been nothing but respectful and cooperative throughout this process. Her claims of abuse and instability are going to backfire spectacularly when we put them under scrutiny." The beer garden was buzzing now, with conversations stopping at multiple tables as people tried to listen in. Sarah and I continued our consultation for another 10 minutes, discussing strategy and evidence in terms that made it clear Kelsey was in serious legal trouble. Finally, Sarah packed up her papers and shook my hand. "I'll see you in court Monday morning. We're going to destroy their case." She left, and I remained at my table, calmly finishing my beer while the gossip mill exploded around me. I could see Kelsey and Brent having an urgent, whispered conversation with their supporters. Several people were already pulling out their phones, probably texting the news to friends who weren't at the festival. That's when Phase 2 began. Dr. Margaret Harrow, my physician, arrived with her husband and teenage daughter. They were dressed casually and appeared to be enjoying the festival like any other family. When she spotted me, she came over with a genuine smile. "Eli, you look wonderful. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thanks. The new treatment protocol seems to be working." "I'm so glad to hear that. You know, I was just telling my husband about your case the other day. It's a perfect example of how chronic illness affects the whole family system, not just the patient." She sat down without being invited, and her voice carried clearly as she continued. The psychological component is often overlooked. When a patient has a strong support system, they tend to improve much faster. But when they're dealing with additional stress, emotional abuse, isolation, constant criticism, it can actually make the physical symptoms worse. I saw Kelsey go pale from across the beer garden. Dr. Harrow was essentially diagnosing the situation in public, explaining how a patient's home environment could either help or hinder their recovery. In your case, I think removing the source of chronic stress has been more beneficial than any medication we could have prescribed. Your inflammation markers have improved dramatically since you started living alone. It was a devastating assessment, delivered by a respected physician in front of half the town. The implication was clear. Kelsey hadn't just failed to support me through my illness. She'd actively made it worse. Dr. Harrow chatted for a few more minutes about my progress and prognosis, painting a picture of a man who was recovering well now that he was in a healthier environment. Then she rejoined her family, leaving behind a beer garden full of people who were rapidly reassessing everything they thought they knew about my situation. The final phase began around 4 o'clock, when Liam arrived with a group of my old construction crew. These were guys I'd worked with for years, men who knew my character and work ethic better than anyone. They were also the kind of blue-collar crowd that carried serious social weight in a town like ours. "Eli, good to see you, buddy." Tommy Rodriguez, my former foreman, grabbed me in a bear hug. "We've been worried about you." "I'm doing well, better than I have in a long time." "That's what we like to hear. You know, we were just talking about that house you built for the Johnsons. Remember that foundation work? Nobody else in town could have handled that slope the way you did." The conversation turned to construction stories, tales of difficult jobs, and creative solutions. These men spoke about me with respect and admiration, treating me like the skilled craftsman I'd once been rather than the invalid Kelsey had tried to make me appear. "You thinking about getting back into contracting?" asked Mike Sullivan, another former employee. "Because I've got more work than I can handle, and I could use someone with your experience." "Maybe part-time," I said. "Depends on how the legal situation shakes out." "Legal situation?" Tommy's expression darkened when I explained about the divorce and Kelsey's accusations. These were men who'd worked alongside me for years, who'd seen me push through pain and exhaustion to get jobs done, who knew exactly what kind of man I was. "That's bullshit," Tommy said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "You're one of the most stand-up guys I know. If anyone was the problem in that marriage, it sure as hell wasn't you." The other men nodded agreement, and their voices grew louder as they shared stories about my character and work ethic. It was an impromptu character witness session conducted in public by men whose opinions carried weight in the community. By 5 o'clock, the damage was done. The narrative had shifted completely. Instead of being seen as a failed husband who'd driven his wife to seek comfort elsewhere, I was now viewed as a good man who'd been betrayed and slandered by an unfaithful wife and her lover. Kelsey and Brent left the festival shortly after, their victory lap having turned into a humiliating retreat. But I wasn't done yet. Monday morning would bring the real reckoning, when all of this carefully orchestrated public relations work would be backed up by hard evidence in a court of law. Kelsey thought she'd been playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to find out how wrong she was. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharp and clear. I dressed carefully in my only suit, a charcoal gray number I'd bought for our wedding 8 years ago. It still fit well, and the mirror showed me a man who looked confident and composed. Nothing like the broken invalid Kelsey had described in her court filings. The courthouse was a stately brick building in the center of town, the kind of place where justice was supposed to be served with dignity and impartiality. I arrived early and found Sarah Chen waiting for me on the front steps, looking professional and prepared. "Ready for this?" she asked, adjusting her briefcase. "More than ready." We walked inside together, our footsteps echoing in the marble hallway. The family court was on the second floor, a wood-paneled room that managed to be both formal and intimate. Kelsey was already there with her attorney, a middle-aged man named Harrison, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics and expensive fees. Kelsey looked nervous, constantly checking her phone and whispering urgently with her lawyer. She'd dressed conservatively for court, trying to project an image of respectability that was somewhat undermined by the expensive jewelry Brent had obviously bought her. Brent himself was conspicuously absent, probably on the advice of Harrison. Having the affair partner present in court would have been a tactical error, making the adultery aspect impossible to ignore. Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to Tina, entered at exactly 9 o'clock. She was a stern woman in her 50s with a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense and focusing on facts. Sarah had briefed me on her background. Former prosecutor, divorced herself, not particularly sympathetic to sob stories from either side. "This is the matter of Parker versus Parker," the judge announced. "I've reviewed both filings and the preliminary motions. Mr. Harrison, you're representing the petitioner?" "Yes, Your Honor. My client is seeking dissolution of marriage based on irreconcilable differences, along with appropriate division of assets and spousal support." "Ms. Chen, you're representing the respondent?" "Yes, Your Honor. We're contesting the divorce based on adultery and mental cruelty and seeking damages accordingly." Judge Morrison nodded and shuffled through her papers. "I see we have conflicting narratives here. Mrs. Parker claims her husband became abusive and unstable due to his medical condition. Mr. Parker claims his wife engaged in a systematic campaign of emotional abuse while conducting an extramarital affair. Let's start with evidence." What followed was 3 hours of methodical destruction of Kelsey's credibility. Sarah presented the text messages first, projecting them on a screen for the entire courtroom to see. The judge read each one carefully, her expression growing more stern as the evidence mounted. "He's become so dependent, so needy," she read aloud from one of Kelsey's messages to Brent. "Sometimes I feel more like a caregiver than a wife. This was sent 3 months ago, Mrs. Parker. Yet in your filing, you claim the marriage was salvageable until recently." Kelsey's attorney tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "I'm reading from evidence you submitted, counselor. Your client's own words contradict her sworn statements." The phone records came next, showing hundreds of calls and messages between Kelsey and Brent dating back 6 months. The timeline was damning, proving that the affair had been ongoing long before I'd discovered it. Then came the witness statements. Dr. Harrow testified about my medical condition and how emotional stress could exacerbate symptoms. She explained that my recent improvement coincided directly with the removal of chronic stressors from my environment. In my professional opinion, she concluded, Mr. Parker's condition was being actively worsened by his home situation. The improvement in his symptoms since the separation has been remarkable. Tommy Rodriguez and several of my former employees testified about my character and work ethic, painting a picture of a dedicated professional who'd continued working despite his illness until it became physically impossible. "Eli never missed a day unless he was literally too sick to stand," Tommy told the court. "Even then, he'd try to come in and supervise. The idea that he was faking or exaggerating his condition is ridiculous to anyone who actually knows him." But the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source: Janet Morrison, the elderly woman who lived next door to Kelsey's apartment. Sarah had tracked her down during the discovery process, and her statement was a bombshell. "I heard them arguing several times," she testified. The woman, Mrs. Parker, was always yelling about what a burden her husband was, how she deserved better. The man she was with would agree and encourage her to leave. They made no effort to keep their voices down. "Did you ever hear Mr. Parker during these conversations?" Sarah asked. "No, ma'am. He was never there during the arguments I heard. It was always Mrs. Parker and the other man, talking about her husband like he was some kind of problem to be solved." Harrison tried desperately to salvage his case during cross-examination, but the evidence was overwhelming. Every accusation Kelsey had made was contradicted by documentation or witness testimony. Her claims of abuse were unsupported by any evidence, while her own abusive behavior was thoroughly documented. The final blow came when Sarah played audio recordings I'd made during some of Kelsey's worst verbal attacks. I'd started recording them months ago, initially just to confirm that I wasn't imagining the cruelty. Now, they served as evidence of systematic emotional abuse. The judge listened to Kelsey's voice berating me for being weak and pathetic, calling me a burden and suggesting I was faking my symptoms for attention. Her tone was vicious, cruel in a way that made everyone in the courtroom uncomfortable. "This is your voice, Mrs. Parker?" Judge Morrison asked. "Yes, but—" "And these recordings were made without your knowledge?" "Your Honor," Sarah interjected, "Maine is a one-party consent state. Mr. Parker had every right to record conversations in his own home." The judge nodded. "The recordings are admissible. Mrs. Parker, I have to say that your behavior as documented here is appalling. You've systematically abused and demeaned your husband while conducting an extramarital affair, then attempted to portray yourself as the victim when he discovered your infidelity." Harrison made one last desperate attempt to shift blame back to me, arguing that my illness had changed me and made me difficult to live with. It was a mistake. "Counselor," Judge Morrison said coldly, "are you seriously arguing that chronic illness justifies adultery and emotional abuse? Because if so, I'd like to see the legal precedent for that position." Harrison wisely backed down, but the damage was done. The judge had heard enough. "I'm going to rule from the bench," she announced. "This is a clear case of adultery and mental cruelty on the part of the petitioner. The marriage is dissolved, but not on the terms Mrs. Parker requested." What followed was a complete reversal of everything Kelsey had demanded. I would keep the house, my disability payments would remain untouched, and she would receive no alimony. The shared assets would be divided, but not equally. Her adultery and cruelty had forfeited her claim to an equal share. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison continued, "I'm ordering Mrs. Parker to pay her husband's legal fees. Her false accusations and frivolous claims have wasted this court's time and caused unnecessary expense." Kelsey looked like she'd been physically struck. Her face went white, then red, then white again, as the full implications sank in. She'd gambled everything on her ability to portray me as an abusive deadbeat, and she'd lost spectacularly. Harrison was already packing his briefcase, probably calculating how much of his fee he'd never collect. Kelsey grabbed his arm desperately, whispering something urgent, but he just shook his head and walked away. "The court will issue a formal order within 48 hours, Judge Morrison concluded. "This hearing is adjourned." As people filed out of the courtroom, I remained seated for a moment, letting the victory sink in. Sarah was gathering her papers, looking satisfied with the outcome. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Like justice," I said simply. Kelsey walked past our table on her way out, and for a moment our eyes met. I saw rage there, and humiliation, and something that might have been regret. But it was too late for regret now. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. Outside the courthouse, word of the verdict was already spreading. In a town this size, news traveled fast, especially news this dramatic. By evening, everyone would know that Kelsey's accusations had been proven false, that she'd been the abuser rather than the victim. I drove home to my empty house, which no longer felt empty at all. It felt like mine again, like a place where I could rebuild my life without constantly being told I was worthless. The future stretched out ahead of me, full of possibilities I hadn't dared to consider in months. Kelsey had wanted to destroy me, to take everything I had and leave me with nothing but shame and defeat. Instead, she'd given me something precious. The knowledge that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I could fight back when cornered, that I didn't have to accept other people's definitions of who I was. The weak man she'd married was gone. In his place was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous to those who would try to take advantage of him. It was time to start the next chapter of my life. 3 weeks after the court hearing, I was sitting in my garage workshop when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the window, I saw Brent Collier climbing out of his pickup truck, his face set in hard lines. He'd finally worked up the courage for a confrontation. I continued organizing my tools as his footsteps approached, not bothering to look up when his shadow filled the doorway. Let him make the first move. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Do we?" I selected a wrench from the pegboard and examined it carefully. "I thought you'd said everything you needed to say. That was before you destroyed Kelsey in court, before you turned this whole town against us." Now I looked at him. Brent Collier, the golden boy who'd always gotten what he wanted through charm and intimidation, looked haggard. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive clothes wrinkled. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the desperate energy of a man watching his world collapse. "I didn't turn anyone against you," I said calmly. "I just told the truth. Apparently that was enough." "The truth?" He stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. "The truth is that you're a broken-down has-been who couldn't satisfy his wife. The truth is that she came to me because you weren't man enough to handle a real woman." I set down the wrench and turned to face him fully. "And how's that working out for you now?" The question hit him like a physical blow, because the answer was obvious to both of us. It wasn't working out at all. The court hearing had been a public relations disaster for both of them. Within hours of the verdict, everyone in town knew that Kelsey's accusations had been proven false, that she'd been the abuser rather than the victim. The sympathy and support she'd carefully cultivated evaporated overnight. But Brent had suffered even more. His auto repair business was hemorrhaging customers as word spread about his role in the affair. Men who'd brought their cars to him for years were taking their business elsewhere, disgusted by his betrayal of another man's marriage. Several of his employees had quit, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. "This isn't over," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Yes, it is." I stepped closer, and for the first time since I'd known him, Brent Collier took a step backward. "You took something that didn't belong to you, and now you're paying the price. That's how consequences work. You think you've won? You think destroying my business makes you some kind of hero?" "I didn't destroy your business, Brent. You did that when you decided to sleep with another man's wife. I just made sure people knew who you really are." He was breathing heavily now, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. For a moment, I thought he might actually swing at me. Part of me hoped he would. It would give me legal justification to finish what he'd started. Instead, he turned and walked back to his truck, his shoulders slumped in defeat. At the driver's door, he paused and looked back at me. "Kelsey was right about one thing," he said. "You're not the man you used to be." I smiled, and something about that expression made him flinch. "You're absolutely right. I'm much worse." He drove away without another word, leaving me alone with the satisfaction of a job well done. Brent Collier had learned what happened when you underestimated a man who had nothing left to lose. That evening, I drove to Murphy's bar for what had become a regular celebration. Liam had taken to keeping a bottle of good whiskey behind the bar specifically for these occasions, and tonight felt like it deserved the premium treatment. "How'd it go with Brent?" he asked, pouring 2 glasses of Jameson. "About like you'd expect. He's finally starting to understand that actions have consequences." "Good. The bastard had it coming." Liam raised his glass. "To consequences. To consequences." We drank, and I filled him in on the confrontation. Liam listened with the satisfied expression of a man watching justice served. "You know," he said, "I've been hearing things. About both of them." "What kind of things?" "Kelsey's been trying to find a new place to live. Turns out Tina doesn't want her as a roommate anymore, not after all the drama, and most of the other people she thought were friends have suddenly become unavailable." It wasn't surprising. Kelsey had built her social circle on being the sympathetic victim of a difficult marriage. Once that narrative collapsed, she had nothing left to offer but association with scandal and humiliation. What about work? That's the interesting part. Word is, the clinic's been getting complaints about her. Seems some of the patients heard about the court case and weren't happy about having their private medical information gossiped about in bars. I remembered Dr. Harrow's testimony about how Kelsey had been mocking elderly patients on the recordings I'd made. Those recordings had been played in open court, and in a town this size, word traveled fast. They're not going to fire her, Liam continued, but they've made it clear that her behavior needs to improve. No more gossip, no more unprofessional conduct, no more drama. It was a fitting punishment for someone who'd used gossip as a weapon for so long. Kelsey would have to keep her mouth shut and her head down, or risk losing the job she'd claimed was so important to her independence. And Brent? His business is finished. He's lost at least half his customers, and the rest are probably going to drift away over time. Nobody wants to be associated with that kind of scandal. I felt a moment of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. Brent had made his choices with full knowledge of what he was doing. The fact that those choices had consequences wasn't my problem. There's something else, Liam said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. I heard they're not together anymore. What? Kelsey and Brent. Apparently they had a big fight about a week ago. She wanted him to help her pay for an appeal of the court decision, and he refused. Things got ugly, and she moved out. The news hit me with unexpected force. After everything they'd put me through, after destroying my marriage and trying to destroy my reputation, they couldn't even make their relationship work. The great love affair that had been worth betraying a marriage for had lasted less than a month after being exposed. So she's alone now? Completely. No boyfriend, no friends, no support system. Just her job and whatever savings she has left after paying legal fees. It was a harsh fate, but one entirely of her own making. Kelsey had burned every bridge in her pursuit of what she thought was a better life, only to discover that the man she'd chosen was just as selfish and unreliable as she was. I finished my whiskey and headed home, driving through streets that felt familiar and welcoming again. The whispers and pitying looks were gone, replaced by nods of respect and genuine smiles. I'd reclaimed my place in this community, not through lies or manipulation, but by simply telling the truth and letting the chips fall where they may. At home, I sat in my workshop and thought about the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd been a broken man, defeated by illness and crushed by the cruelty of someone I'd loved. I'd accepted the role of victim, believing that I deserved the treatment I was receiving. Now I understood that nobody deserves to be abused, that illness doesn't make you weak, and that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is fight back against people who are trying to destroy you. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I wondered if it might be Kelsey, trying to reach out now that she'd lost everything. But when I opened it, the message was from Jim Morrison, Tina's husband. Heard about your court victory. Congratulations. I meant what I said about having work for you if you're interested. Call me when you're ready. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about possibilities and second chances. My illness wasn't gone. It probably never would be completely, but I'd learned to manage it better. More importantly, I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. I typed back, I'm ready, let's talk. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that I was more than the sum of my limitations. But tonight, I was content to sit in my workshop, surrounded by tools and possibilities, knowing that I'd fought the most important battle of my life and won. Kelsey had wanted to break me, to reduce me to nothing more than a burden to be discarded. Instead, she'd forged me into something harder and more resilient than I'd ever been before. I was no longer the man she'd married, and I was grateful for that. That man had been too trusting, too willing to accept abuse in the name of love, too ready to believe that he deserved whatever treatment he received. The man I'd become was different, stronger, more dangerous to those who would try to take advantage of him, and absolutely unwilling to be anyone's victim ever again.